Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're going over the soft skills we think you need to be a successful lawyer. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Conference. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about some of the soft skills we think you need to develop to be a successful attorney. It probably shouldn't be a surprise that law school doesn't actually prepare you to really be like this wonderful, successful lawyer. Sure, you learn skills like legal writing and legal analysis, but practicing law or even building a business, these take other soft skills. And some law schools are getting better at offering opportunities for students to gain these skills, but it's really up to you to make sure that you are fully ready for practice. So Lee, what are some of these skills we're talking about?
Well, the first kind of bundle of skills I think a lot of people think about are just general business skills. And by this, we mean understanding basic finances of a business, like money goes in, money goes out. Some people even find it valuable to understand how to read a balance sheet. I'll be honest.
I would say most corporate lawyers probably should be able to do that.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I didn't know how to do that when I exited law school.
But we were litigators. It's fine. No,
it's fine.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You should still be able to read a balance sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Your clients are businesses.
Exactly. Just even a general understanding of how law firms or other basic businesses work. The law firm model and the partner model is probably something that you should understand if you are entering that work environment.
Sure. I remember being shocked when I found out that at a lot of firms, new partners have to pay to join the firm.
Yeah.
Equity contributions. Like $100,000 or more. And I was just like, are you joking?
Mm-hmm.
No one told me this.
Yeah.
I'm going to work all these years and kill myself to become a partner, and then I have to pay for the privilege?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I probably should have known that.
And then all those ideas of shared liability as well. Could also be very interesting.
Yes, for sure.
So
I think any type of law that you're thinking of practicing, you should understand the basics of how that works as a business. I mean, even if you want to do, say, nonprofit work, or you want to work, in public interest stuff, you need to understand, how do these places bring in money, and to what extent are you going to be responsible for that?
Yeah. Let's talk about balance sheets. I mean, when I was on the board of a nonprofit, that's really where I learned how to get into the nitty-gritty of balance or accounting sheets, because let's talk about where money is the tightest. It's pretty much in the nonprofit world. And you have to look at every single line item super carefully and understand, how money is tracked going in and going out.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't matter what sort of lawyer you think you're going to be. Somebody's got to get paid.
Yeah.
There's some way that you're going to get paid for this. And I think it would behoove you generally to understand what that way is.
Mm-hmm. I think basic client-facing skills are really important as well. You can gain these by doing a lot of different activities. It doesn't have to be in the legal environment, but you should know how to talk to a client. Maybe even sell them something.
Yeah, absolutely. Selling is a bad word for lawyers, but the reality is that's, as we said, everybody's got to get paid somehow, and somebody's got to sell someone on paying you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it works, whether it's a grant or, I guess the government lawyers, maybe not. But even then, I think, everybody's advocating for more people in their department or whatever it is. You've got to be able to make it the case for something.
For sure. I think that sales or rainmaking is oftentimes how the lawyers like to frame it, is a huge part of being a successful lawyer, especially if you do want to eventually become a partner.
Or if you want to have your own firm.
Yeah, or if you want to have your own firm. And you have to understand what that means. And it's not just you going out and, face-to-face selling. It's also just about building relationships and figuring out how to maintain those relationships. I mean, let's just talk about how a lot of people get their business from referrals.
Oh, yeah.
And, and referrals come through networking, through maintaining the connections of the people that you have made, that you've become friends with or known in law school or college. I mean, how often do you and I talk to each other about lawyer referrals for friends?
All the time.
All the time. All the time. And that all comes out of, our own personal networks and also the reputations of folks that we know around town.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say probably at least once every week or two, somebody asks me like, oh, I need a referral for this really specific type of lawyer. Do you know anyone?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, almost never am I like, oh yeah, I've got the perfect person for you. Right. But they're asking because they know that I know other people who know other people who know other people, and it just kind of gets passed down this chain until something comes back. Yes, actually, I know the perfect person for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that these things work. I mean, if you're not comfortable putting yourself out there and meeting other people, whether that's, in an email or a phone call or in person, that's a skill set you really need to develop.
And talking about what you do, having that elevator pitch, even, what we're talking about here is even how we give referrals. I mean, I have to know, if my friend practices family law, which is a referral I'm frequently asked for, what sort of family law does she do? Does she do prenups? Does she do, simple dissolutions? Does she do complicated child custody? Does she do large, complicated estates where there's a lot of money involved? You can't send someone to a referral who wants a very simple divorce to a divorce attorney who does very complicated estate division because, one, they're going to be way too expensive for that person. But that's just not in their wheelhouse. It's not what they do. In the same way, you can't send someone who has a very complicated divorce coming up or very contentious divorce to someone who just does simple, we're just going to like sell the cars and separate the house and whatever. And file it and be done with it. It's got to be the right fit. And so you have to talk about what you do to your friends and your network so people even know how to give you business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like learning how to frame what type of work you do, learning how to frame the type of work you're interested in, these are skills that will serve you well in whatever type of law you end up doing. Say you're at a cocktail party and you're a public interest attorney and you meet someone and you explain to them the basics of like, oh, we work with children who are facing deportation. And they're like, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. I'd love to help out with that because I happen to be super wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly it's like, oh, wow, great. We've just made this connection that might keep keep this group alive for like another 6 months. Like you just never know who you're going to meet and who you're going to talk to. And just saying like, oh, I do public interest work, like doesn't really cut it.
It's true. And it's being comfortable just talking about what you do. It's not like in a pompous way, but in a confident way, because you don't know. I mean, I have been at playgroups with my son and met people in philanthropy who I said, oh, I then have this great philanthropic organization I think you should know about. Let's all go have lunch.
Exactly. Or, you and I are having lunch and we sit next to someone who overhears us chatting about what we do and offers to work for us. Like you just never know.
Yep.
And having, developing that comfort level with sort of talking about yourself in a professional way, I think is something that's going to pay dividends regardless of what type of law you end up doing.
Yeah. And again, this doesn't come easily for everybody. You have to work on it. I mean, I will be honest, when I first started tutoring, my husband, who had worked in corporate America much longer than I had, would laugh at how bad my sales pitch was on the phone. Like he really would. Like, I don't know, Allison, if I've told you this, but he would just be like, that wasn't very good. Like, you didn't sound confident. You didn't, you sounded too needy. Like, all of these mistakes that you make.
You didn't make the ask.
You didn't make the ask. You acted like, they were doing you a favor by talking to you, whatever it might be. There was a lot of feedback that I was glad he gave me. Although it can be tough to hear that feedback at the time, but of like, you're not that good at this. You need to work on your sales pitch. And recently he was listening to me make another one, and he's like, "Wow, you are so much better." I'm like, "Well, I'd like to think I have been, since I've been doing this now since 2009." But it's something you have to work on, and if you can work on that stuff even before you enter your legal career, and then throughout your legal career, it's just going to serve you well.
Yeah, I mean, even, I think I've told you this before, but the judge that I worked for, when he was appointed, he was very young. I think he was barely 40. He was the youngest judge on the bench at the time. And so, the judge persona is usually this old white-haired man, and that was not him. But he was quite lucky because his mother was an actress. And for his first year on the bench, whenever he came and did something, whether it's talking to the jury, giving jury instructions, or whatever it was, she would actually come to court and later critique him. And exactly like your husband did, to say, look, that was not very good. Your pitch was off. You rushed through this part. It sounded like you weren't confident. Here's what you need to do instead. You need to take a breath here. And these are things that everybody has to work on. And I mean, the funny thing is I clerked for him after he'd been on the judge bench for 20 plus years. And the first time you heard his jury colloquy or whatever they call it, it was like, wow, that was so amazing. About the seventh time you'd heard it with exactly the same intonation and exactly the same pauses and exactly the same joke at exactly the same time. We could basically say it with him. But I mean, the first time you saw it, and for everybody else, it was their first time. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And, and he wasn't ashamed of this. He's like, yeah, I wasn't very good at this when I started out, and now I'm really good at it.
Yeah. I mean, I used to do a lot of singing and performing and theater. And boy, that was some solid practice for doing so much of what I've done in my corporate life, because you're used to playing a role, memorizing something, delivering it. And that's a lot of what sometimes being in business can be. Or
and I think sometimes law students feel sort of self-conscious. Thank you. Yes, they feel self-conscious if this is not something they're immediately comfortable doing, and they think oh, well, I'm just going to have to find some way of being a lawyer that doesn't involve speaking in front of people because I really hate doing that. And it's that's probably not realistic. You're going to have to talk in front of someone. But also you can develop these skills, and it's something worth working on, whether it's, doing a Toastmasters that I can guarantee you is in your city. Where you have to get in a safe environment, you learn how to become more comfortable talking in front of a group, or something like improv classes, or singing. I mean, that's fairly non-threatening. Excuse me, because you don't actually have to make up what you're going to say. But
it's true.
Improv, again, a pretty low stakes environment where you can become more comfortable with these things.
Absolutely, and have a little fun. And I think that one of the things that's to take away from this discussion of some of these soft skills is gaining these soft skills doesn't always have to be miserable. It's not an extension of your class. I mean, I have friends who take improv classes because they want to work on things like public speaking or being more comfortable in front of groups, and they have a blast. It's one of their favorite things to do on a Wednesday night or whenever they go. And I think that's amazing. I think that's really a way to both give yourself a bit of an extracurricular activity, but also to blow off steam and work on skills at the same time.
Yeah, although you have to know yourself. The idea of going to an improv class to me would be my absolute worst nightmare. But, I might force myself to develop these skills in another way. Maybe I volunteer to be on a panel or something, or I volunteer to give a talk. And that's something that, I might be a little uncomfortable with, but not as I wouldn't recoil from it in horror the way that I would an improv class.
Fair point. I don't think I'd be that funny in an improv class. So it's never been. I would always pick a singing thing to work on. But it's all about, working on what's challenging for you. But even when I was doing a lot of theater, sometimes I would, push myself outside of the box to try and do a type of theater I'd never done before. So once when I was in my early 20s, I did mostly musical theater, but I auditioned for the Vagina Monologues.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was an interesting experience to audition for. And then I got it, which was great. And then I had to give the Vagina Monologues in front of thousands of people, which was definitely a really challenging and unique experience if you've never seen or read the Vagina Monologues. They are very powerful, but they are on subject matters that most of us don't talk about in front of thousands of people. So,
Well, good for you for pushing yourself.
There I did push myself. And luckily they had us dress up in these bright red dresses, and it was all a very kind of costumed event. But, you can still learn something or push yourself out of your comfort zone to get better at these things, even if you're already used to speaking in front of people.
Yeah, because it's never going to be, there's no downside to developing even some other skills like in a different area of sort of the same broad topic. I mean, say like going back to business skills, okay, fine, now you can read a balance sheet. Well, what else do you need to know? Like there's always something else that you need to know.
And you can get these skills in a lot of different ways. You can take classes, or online classes now are great because you could even do them during the off season of school over the summer or over, some schools have really long holiday breaks. You can even work on some of this stuff on the holiday break if you're twiddling your thumbs in the snow somewhere in your family's home. But you can learn a lot about stuff just online. You can also just learn about law firms and read about them, read some business books on law firms, read books on starting businesses or running businesses, read accounting books. All sorts of things like that are just going to make anything else you learn more meaningful. If you do some research on or do some reading on accounting and then you are at a volunteer meeting where they pull out balance sheets to talk about the budget, that's going to mean more to you. You're going to be able to be more engaged, and it's going to, give you the ability to exercise those skills, which I think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at this point, pretty much any specific skill you would like to learn, there's probably a free online class that can teach it to you. The idea that you can't find like a fundamentals of business accounting class to take on Coursera or something I just don't believe that. Like, I believe that those are out there.
Yeah. I also think it's important that you consider, we talked about maybe getting a job where you work in sales. Sometimes you can get part-time jobs during the summer or things like that. And if you do get an internship or an externship in law school, really pay attention and try and learn and observe, how is the organization run? Ask questions. I mean, don't ask so many questions that you're distracting, but try and really absorb what's going on around you, because you might pick up valuable tidbits that you can take with you to your next job opportunity.
Yeah, and I remember one of the firms I worked at said, to the summer associates, congratulations, you're now working in a law firm. You need to read the Wall Street Journal every day. Mm-hmm. This is a baseline of your job, is you need to know what is in the business section of the Wall Street Journal. End of story.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. I think there's really... the people who really are like sponges and just soak up all of this stuff coming from all these different places, those are the people who really thrive in most legal environments, because you do need to kind of know a little bit about a lot of things. Basically, if you're a business lawyer particularly, like you're essentially being paid to like keep an eye on what's going on that might affect your client. In order to do that, you need to know what's going on in the world.
It's so true. It's really interesting. When I worked in political PR, when I was first out of college, one of my jobs every morning was to go online and read all of the major newspapers and look for any articles that either mentioned a client, mentioned something of like a product that the client did or a competitor, anything in the industry that was of note, and send them to my bosses so they could basically get a digest of what they thought was important and then alert the clients of anything that they thought was important. And it was really interesting because it did really raise that issue for me that you're supposed to just be knowledgeable. Now, you're not going to have like an assistant to go read newspapers every day, but now there are a lot of online ways to skim the news that wasn't available back in the dark ages of when I was doing this, like Twitter, or following certain news feeds, or, digests you can get in your email that can help you comb through information to feel somewhat educated.
Yeah, and if you have clients or products or whatever that, you need to be aware of, set up a Google alert.
Yep,
so, if somebody writes an article about this product, you are alerted to the fact that article exists. Mm-hmm. And I think Twitter is a great way to stay on top of things. Maybe like whatever, if your Facebook feed is relevant. Most people, it's not super businessy. But, you can basically have aggregators, for example, for different blogs. And so every morning when you get up, your RSS feed aggregator or whatever has gone out and collected all of this information. And so you can spend 10 minutes sort of getting the pulse of what's going on, so that you are that person where when somebody, said, oh, did you hear about blah, blah, blah? Like, yeah, I did. I read an article about it. Let me tell you. Mm-hmm. Or you can go to the person and be like, hey, did you see this major thing that happened that nobody's really talking about yet with our client? Like, you want to be that person.
Right. So true. So true. Going back to this the communication skills, we talked about needing to be able to be comfortable talking in front of people. I think it's also important if you're in law school to go ahead and take the opportunities to practice speaking in front of other people. I mean, we talk about that this is one of the things about the Socratic method that some people forget that adds value. But if you want to be really any type of attorney or a litigator, specifically where you think you might go into court, maybe you should try and sign up for advocacy competitions or do moot court or do a competition or volunteer to even speak up for your group in a group project setting, whatever it might be. The more you get in front of people and the more you speak, the better you get at it. I mean, Allison, we can use this podcast as an example. The first couple of these we did, we had a bit of a tough time. We'll be honest, guys. There was a lot more editing. Maybe we felt it was clunkier. We weren't as comfortable, but I don't know what episode number this is going to be, but we have done a lot at this point.
Right. But, let's admit the first ones we basically scripted out like 80% of what we wanted to talk about because we weren't sure how to do this.
Yeah.
And, now we can put together a script in 5 minutes probably. And
we like to think we're getting better. Hopefully you guys agree, but
I know it's kind of embarrassing how many people listen to the original episodes. Actually, I think they're some of the most popular ones. Sorry about that. And I mean, also with communication, it's also writing. It's not. I'm not talking about legal writing here, but I'm talking about other types of writing and communication. Even things like writing reasonable emails. How do you write a helpful email to someone or an email that's not going to be annoying? These are things that ideally you spend some time thinking about or doing some reading about. How do you follow up after a meeting?
Right.
There are certain ways that are better or worse.
Right.
And, ideally you want your emails to be read and you want them to be well received and you want someone to think, wow, that was really helpful. I'm glad that person sent me that email.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is something where generation to generation in the workforce can also be something you need to be aware of. I think the text messaging generation is a lot more comfortable with very short, curt responses that I think the generation above them or multiple generations above them might take as rude.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're used to, being on Slack with your friends and suddenly you have to compose an email to a 50-year-old partner in a law firm, you got to know your tone. And this is one of the soft skills. It's like, know who you're talking to. By the same sort of token, if you are out, working in a firm and pitching business to a tech company, you should approach that differently than if you're pitching to an insurance company, for example. And that's part of one of the soft skills of like essentially emotional intelligence is what's your audience? What are you trying to present here? Not that you want to be a different person or something, but which aspect of your personality or which aspect of your background do you want to emphasize? These are the sort of skills that are great to try to develop.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, and I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, but when it comes to that formal, informal, curt, non-curt, that when you're in the workplace, one, the best way to figure this out is to observe those around you, but to always err on a little more formal and then become more casual as you figure out where that casual nature is. You're never going to get in trouble for being too formal.
No, I think that's right. But by the same token, if someone writes me an email and calls me Miss Monahan and I tell them, oh, it's fine if you call me Allison, and then they keep calling me Miss Monahan, at some point I'd be like, just stop.
Right.
Like, I told you what to do, actually. Like I told you what my preference is. Please follow that.
Right. But it's interesting. When I was teaching, when I first taught my very first class, I thought I wanted to be like the cool professor.
Right.
So I had them call me Lee. And it was a disaster. It really was a terrible disaster because the formality of the professor-student relationship actually has some value. And checking how we talk to each other, just checking the dynamic. I think that teacher-student dynamic is a known dynamic. And it was interesting. The next year, I said I would never do that again, and the dynamic changed. When I would only go by Professor Burgess, which I thought sounded very stuffy, but it changed the relationship dynamic to become more of what it needed to be. I thought that was just kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting, I think. And I think, learning to kind of suss out these social nuances is something that law schools do less than like a business school might do. Mm-hmm. And, I think one way people can kind of become more aware of this is either by doing some reading on their own or by possibly taking a class in a different area of the school.
That's a good idea.
So if you know that maybe communication is not your forte, or like being aware of other people's, the signals they're sending, there may be other classes you can take in like a business school context, for example, or even like, maybe there's a communications department. You can probably get law school credit for taking, at least a few. I mean, I took an architecture school class and got credit just because I thought it'd be fun.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I mean, it's important to look at all your options and see what you can pull together to fill those gaps, because all of our gaps are different. We each have our own strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, and again, there are also tons of people online who, basically have programs to sort of coach you through essentially, communication and emotional awareness and those kind of things, so that you can be better at communicating with people and better at picking up on the cues they're sending, and just generally better at, being a human being, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. What about, totally switching gears, what about technical skills, computer skills? I mean, I think it's pretty important that any student exiting law school has basic word processing and PowerPoint presentation or keynote presentation making skills. Don't you think?
I would say beyond basic. I would say we should be at least at an intermediate level here. Mm-hmm. Like you can't, sure, you can open up like a document and type in it, but can you do what I would consider pretty basic formatting things that are important? Like, do you know how to mark up a document so the table of contents gets automatically created? Things like that, where, yeah, of course you may have a secretary or whatever, but these are just like basic skills that you need to know. Mm-hmm. Or like an Excel file. Do you know how to make a basic equation that can sum up things or something? I mean, like, you should know how to do this.
Yeah, track changes is also really important.
Oh, God, yeah.
Comparing documents. I've also heard a lot of legal professionals talk to me about the importance of being able to compare versions of Word, and that you should know that Word can do stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Some people just seem to have no understanding of like the capabilities of these programs. It's like, look at all the stuff. Like when you open up one of these programs, their menus, their menu bar, like they can do more than just let you type in them.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and I think the same thing outside of the word processing realm is just like their basic sort of things you should know, say about the internet, or like, social media. Like, how do you say you're going to be working at, some sort of public interest organization, and one of your jobs is going to be to maintain their social media feed? I mean, you might think like, oh, that's not like a lawyer, but the reality is they may not have anyone else to do it.
Right.
And if you're the new person on the block, that might be your job. You need to be generally aware of like, oh, should we be using Buffer for this? Like, are there ways, just, there are things you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And this stuff isn't rocket science. You just need to go out and find out how to be educated about it. And luckily, the internet, on one hand, makes it very easy for us to be educated, but you can also get lost in it. So you need to, find some resources and just try and get as much information as you can, and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and if you want to learn something like Excel, sure, there are like lots of ways you could do that independently online, but you could also take a class.
Yeah.
And it's possible that your workplace might even pay for this. It's possible you may have access to certain things through your school. If you want like a more structured learning environment, you can definitely find that. But I think, the onus is really on you to basically admit to yourself, like, you know what, I actually really don't have any clue how to like use Word beyond just typing into it. Yeah. Like maybe I should make myself aware of what the options are. I mean, you probably saw the thing that circulated about some client who basically made his law firm submit their associates for a test of like their basic word processing skills.
Oh my gosh.
And like all of them failed it.
Wow.
Because he's like, his point was like, look, I'm paying these people by the hour.
Right.
I should not be paying them to hand type a table of contents. Like, that is literally insane.
Right. That's fascinating. I did not see that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so lots of firms started taking it, and basically they all failed it.
Wow.
And that doesn't look good.
Do you think that's like what we used to have to take to get our temp jobs back in the day when we were doing?
No,
temp
I do.
work?
I think it's basically, I remember being tested on like how fast and accurately I could type. And they're like, okay, you're pretty accurate. Like, we can get you a job.
Yeah. Yeah. And how like I could use a PowerPoint presentation or something like that.
Yeah. But I remember I took a class like in typing when I was in high school or something. And I went to the community college in the summer and I took a typing class because my parents were like, you need to know how to type.
You know what's fascinating is my friends with older kids, say that they're not really teaching typing anymore. And that some of the kids, because they're using computers from such an early age, don't know how to correctly type. And it's really slowing down and changing the accuracy of typing. Isn't that kind of fascinating?
It is. It is. I mean, I worked with someone who touch typed appellate briefs to
my gosh.
It was painful.
Yeah.
It was painful to watch.
I think it was Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing or something like that ran on my very, very old Mac when I was a kid, that taught you how to be accurate when you were typing. But I think they also taught typing in my middle school.
Yeah, but the point is, like, if you are listening to this and you actually don't know how to type, you should learn.
There's got to be a modern version of Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing.
I'm pretty sure there's lots of options out there to help you learn how to type if you need to.
Yeah, maybe that's a future blog post. Ways to learn how to type.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think of another, because I was just thinking of like all the different options for learning things. I was like, oh, Duolingo. And, maybe you need language skills.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And sometimes it's foreign language skills. There are a lot of jobs that you need to have foreign language skills for. And sometimes you might have conversational skills, but you have not had a lot of practice working on those skills in the workplace. And if so, you need to practice them in the workplace.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people. Say you grew up in a household where the first or second language was not English, and so you may be perfectly comfortable speaking and having a conversation, but maybe, I'm thinking of Spanish. Like, you might be able to speak Spanish, but when you start writing with accents and that kind of thing, like, that's a whole different story.
Right, or filling out forms, or, really doing those very detail-oriented things that oftentimes you have to do in a legal environment. Or even learn the terminology,
Exactly.
Law is a foreign language for those of us who speak English that go to law school. So if you're then starting to practice law in another foreign language, then that's a whole another set of, legal terminology that you need to be comfortable with.
Sure. And also, I mean, if you do have language skills that you want to practice in a legal context, often this can be really valuable, because you can do volunteer work or pro bono work where you're actually translating for people. And, it's a great way to get experience. It's a great way to have something interesting to put on your resume. It's a great way to make connections. And also, it's a great way to help people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really true. So don't think that there is no way to work on these skills. There's so many opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to work on your language skills, I guarantee you someone who is a native speaker would be very happy to talk to you on Skype for an hour once a week.
Yeah. Very, very good point.
Probably at a very low price point.
Probably. All right. One of my favorite soft skills to talk about is leadership, because this is something that I also think law students really don't get a lot of opportunity to work on because of how law school is set up. But oftentimes they're on the younger side and they exit graduate school without really having many opportunities to manage people or be in a leadership role. And if you think you're going to want to manage people and someday be in a leadership role, you should work on these skills. And you're probably not going to get them at your law firm.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, the cliche, and I think it's probably true, is that lawyers are terrible managers. And I think mostly that's correct. I think mostly they just don't, most people are not that interested in being managers. But the reality is all these organizations, largely for reasons that they can't really pay people who are not lawyers to, be the CEO or whatever, they're managed by lawyers. And so if you have an interest in this area and you develop some skills in it, potentially you're very valuable.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one of my favorite ways to gain leadership skills is through volunteer work. And I've written about this in the past, but I think that volunteer organizations are really an underutilized way to selfishly get leadership practice and work on a team with other people and to network with, without having to do it in a fully professional setting. Of course, you also get to do good in the world, and that's very important too. But just from a selfish perspective, you can gain a lot of valuable skills. So if you have a passion for, educating young women, legal aid, anything, running, even putting together like a race to raise money for an AIDS foundation. There are so many possible organizations and volunteer efforts that you can be a part of that you can join and then choose to take on leadership roles. You can organize events, which gives you great practice for oftentimes budgeting, working with a team, running conference calls. You can get used to having an agenda for a conference call. I'll be honest, when I first had a job, I didn't know that you were supposed to start meetings with an agenda. I mean, like, it's not like when I called my friends, I had an agenda.
Yeah. Why would you know that?
Right. So, just even, learning those things and then learning from the other people. When I was on a nonprofit board that I served on for a very long time, I was able to really learn from some mentors who were really powerful and successful women high up in corporations in industries that I would have never had contact with. And I learned a lot from them because they were kind enough to teach me things. And
and you were probably very observant and actually paid attention to like, wow, this is a really great way to run a meeting. That was super productive.
Yeah, exactly. Or, I also learned the importance of other things like, I think it's really important to check in with people to have a personal connection before certain meetings. So not if it's a hostile meeting, then maybe not as much depending on the nature. But like if I'm on a board or if I'm in a committee meeting or if we're meeting with our team at the Law School Toolbox, I usually try and start having some sort of personal connection. Like, did anyone take a vacation for the holidays? Like, how's everybody doing? Because I think it's really nice to have that personal basis. And I learned that from watching other people and saying, wow, that was a really effective way to change the nature of this meeting. People may have been cranky to have to be at a meeting, but then everybody got to talk about something fun that's going on in their lives or tell a cute story about their kid or show a picture. And then everybody became kind of happier.
Right, or that, you always have food at your meetings. It makes people happy, little things like this. And to be clear, when you're talking about volunteering, you're not just talking about legally related stuff, right?
No. I mean, I think you can really do just about anything that you're passionate about. And the other benefit of working with an organization that you're passionate about is you talk about it and you get experience talking about it. And going back to one of the things that we talked about in the beginning was getting comfortable with sales, getting comfortable about your elevator pitch. Oftentimes when you're volunteering for an organization, they'll teach you how to do that stuff for that organization. And they might even bring in speakers to teach you how to do an elevator pitch, how to ask for money, how to fundraise, how to do all of that kind of stuff. And if you file those tips away, they will come back and serve you in your business life as well.
Yeah, I mean, another one that occurs to me right now is like, this is obviously not every year, but if you work, say, on an election campaign, like those are going to be great skills that you can take anywhere.
Yep, that's so true. And, I even had a friend who did a great post on Facebook about what she learned by calling at the Hillary Clinton Bank in San Francisco. They were doing, phone
banking.
Phone banking, thank you. And she said that it was something that was really outside of her comfort zone. That it's not something that she'd ever really thought she wanted to do, but she wanted to get involved and they trained her to do it. And she said it became something she really had a good time doing and that she thought it was a skill that she turned out to be pretty good at. Who knew, but, she probably learned a few lessons that she can take back into the rest of her life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, since we're almost out of time, if you've done things that you've worked on these soft skills, go ahead and include them in your resume or cover letter because this is the stuff that recruiters and hiring partners are really looking for. And, it can be a little bit subtle how you work them in, but I think, trying to draw them out and make it clear that like you have had this training or you have had this experience can really work to your benefit.
And it can give you great stories to tell in interviews as well. Exactly. When they are asking, oftentimes they will not so subtly ask about some of these soft skills, especially things like leadership or communication skills. And if you can say, that I'm going back to the improv class because it just is on my mind, even though I have no intention of doing one myself. But if you want to talk about what you learned from your improv class, that would be a pretty memorable interview.
Yeah, and my understanding is, the whole point of the improv class is that you never say no. Mm-hmm. And that's just a whole worldview that people who do a lot of improv, I think, tell you they definitely bring into the workplace of rather than saying, no, we can't do that. You always have to say, sort of continue the narrative. Like, somebody brings you an ice cream cone. You can't be like, no, it's wintertime. I don't want ice cream. You're like, oh, ice cream in the winter. Let me see where I can take that.
Right. That's a really good point. So it's just another way to change your thinking. That's a not very lawyerly way to think. That's kind of interesting.
Not at all. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which could be a good thing. Exactly. But that's probably a whole nother podcast. Maybe we need an improv guest. Who knows? We can work
interesting.
On that. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and ratings on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.